welcome on behalf of the Pastor who's not able to be with us this evening. I'd like to say a warm welcome on behalf of my colleagues from the Lilly Family School. This is really an exciting evening. You're in for a treat. My name is Ina Osili. I'm a professor of philanthropic studies and economics at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, the world's first school of philanthropy. You have to say that often. And I also have the honor of serving as the Dean's Fellow for the Mays Institute on Diverse Philanthropy, which is why we're all here this evening. My colleagues are all delighted to welcome you to this event. I'll just say a few words of welcome and about the Mays Institute, and then I will hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Kim Williams-Pulfer, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Mays Institute and doing an amazing job carving out a unique position for the Mays Institute in our community here across the country and internationally as well. So the Mays Institute on Diverse Philanthropy, its goal is to change the conversation around philanthropy, to foster a greater understanding of the ways that underrepresented donors are both inspired and informed donors by providing knowledge, education, and training. The Institute seeks to understand the perceptions, practices, and experiences of all communities, because we know that philanthropy is present across all races, all ethnicities, all regions of the world that we study. And our goal is also to engage philanthropic practitioners, scholars, and the public at large in this conversation. We know today that governments, corporations, and all institutions are grappling with these questions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And philanthropy has been a bit late to this conversation. The Mays Institute is really designed to serve as a catalyst to spearhead that conversation. The Institute's inspiration, William G. Mays, an Indiana University graduate and also the recipient of an honorary doctorate of science, began his early career here in Indianapolis and provided outstanding local, national, and international leadership across business, civic, and philanthropic spheres. In tribute to his legacy, the Mays Family Institute at Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy has been created. The Institute honors the values of Bill and his wife, Dr. Rose Mays, to provide the community with a space for public inquiry, hands-on training, and the study of generosity within historically underrepresented groups. So special thanks this evening to Dr. Rose Mays, who's with us, and also to several our Mays Council members. Some of them are here, some of them may join us later. And I want to say a special word of welcome to many of our leaders who are with us. Just mention them very quickly. We have Mike Merkel, who is a family member. His wife is on the board of visitors. We have several members of the Indiana Latino Institute board here with us this evening. We want to welcome them and recognize their presence. And colleagues from several other community organizations that are here tonight, too many of them to name individually. But I just want to offer you on behalf of the school a very warm welcome. We're looking forward to your questions, your participation, and we want to make sure that you know that you have a home, not just at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, but within the Mays Institute of Diverse Philanthropy. So I'll stop here and introduce my colleague, Dr. Kim Williams-Pulfer, who's going to come to the podium and introduce our speaker, and then it will be all about our speaker from that point on. So I'll stop and turn it over to Kim.
Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Osili mentioned, my name is Kim Williams-Pulfer, and I'm the postdoctoral research appointee for the Mays Family Institute on Diverse Philanthropy. It is my job and my duty to introduce our amazing specialist on inclusive community philanthropy. Sandra Vargas currently serves as the Senior Executive Leadership Fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, where she shapes the Humphrey School's engagement initiatives. In her work as Senior Executive Fellow, she focuses on engagement within communities of color, new immigrants, as well as low-income communities. Additionally, her work at the Humphrey School also centers issues of racial, social, and economic equity within current initiatives and projects. Formally, Ms. Vargas was the president and CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, one of the oldest and largest community foundations in the country, from 2007 until her retirement in 2016. During her tenure at the Minneapolis Foundation, she oversaw the management of $700 million in assets, the administration of more than 1,000 charitable funds created by individuals, families, and businesses, as well as the distribution of more than $45 million in grants every year. Under Mrs. Vargas' leadership, the foundation focused on aligning the philanthropic passions of donors with the emerging needs of the community. Prior to joining the Minneapolis Foundation, she began her career as a small business consultant in the Minnesota Department of Economic Development and held management positions at the City of Minneapolis and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. A native Minnesotan, Vargas is active in several Twin Cities organizations and serves on the local boards of St. Catherine University, Minnesota Combined, and Wallen Education Partnership. She is also an active member of the National Boards of Independent Sector, 50 Canada, and Hispanics in Philanthropy. She also serves on the advisory committee for the Charles Stewart Mott Chair on Community Foundations. And we have our chair here, Dr. Lori Powerberg, with us here this evening. Ms. Vargas has received numerous awards and recognition. She served as a Bush Foundation Fellow. She was profiled in the book Heroes Among Us in 2008, received the Women's Venture Pioneer Award, and the Medal of Honor from St. Catherine's University. Ms. Vargas earned her bachelor's in business administration from the College of St. Catherine and holds a master's in public administration from Harvard John F. Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Sandra Vargas, as she speaks with us on the topic of Latinx philanthropy, engaging a culture of generosity and collective good.
Thank you so much. My mother would have loved that, and as a matter of fact, she's always kind of tuning in. She's 95 right now. She's going to be 96 in June. So I just want to tell you, those Latinx or Latino genes, however you name them, are really, really good. Let me just say that I am thrilled to be here this afternoon, this evening, night, whatever it is right at this moment. And I want to say thank you to Dr. Rose Mays and for all of the work that has been done. This kind of conversation is so needed throughout our country, throughout the world. I just want to say thank you. And let's give another round of applause for the Institute that was started by this wonderful before I get started on my slide presentation. And I will ask you to get the hook if it goes on too long, because I can go on a long time. First of all, you've heard a little bit about my professional background, but what I want you to know is about my cultural background, because that is as important as my professional background. And I want to tell you that being a Latina, being from a family that had roots in Mexico, northern Mexico, central Mexico, Durango, Chihuahua, and then my grandparents all crossed over the border, or should I say, the border crossed over them. We're not really sure at this point. Has been a very big part of my life. And as a matter of fact, my relatives lived in South Texas, decided that they wanted to have more opportunity, and came up to Minnesota through the migrant stream. So that's something that a lot of people don't know. My background, my history, my legacy was very rich in many things, but very poor in terms of money and resources. I am also the eldest of 8 children in a Latino Catholic family. You get the picture, Latino, Catholic, 8 kids, and everybody had 7 or 8 kids. So I have many, many relatives in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis area. And at one point I thought, maybe I'll run for office. And I tried to look at a map and where are my relatives? Okay, I'm not going to go there. But at any rate, I thought it might be good. Let me say a couple of things more. One of the most important people besides my mother was my grandmother, my abuelita. And I will tell you, she told me things in a way that I never forgot. For example, I was 40 years old, I had just gotten divorced, I thought, oh God, I'm going to have a good time, and she pulls me into the kitchen. And I knew there was something very profound was going to take place in the kitchen. And she said to me, Mija, you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of your family, you have to take care of your community. And it was like, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And I kind of got mad, and then I got over it. And I am one of the leaders in my family that has had women leaders since the beginning of time. And I am so grateful for it. I am so grateful for the fact that my family gave me cultural roots so that I could know and depend on who I am as I struggled in certain spots in my career. The question of culture is a very important one. And I want to say this. I think for people of color who come into white organizations, we struggle. It is not part of our natural habitat. And so if we do not have our fundamental culture that we grew up with, that our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our aunts, our uncles, our sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers gave us, we are going to struggle. And I would say that to anyone. And so right now, at the Humphrey School, I have the great privilege of co-leading an organization that has 20 people of color, one white man who is doing well, and it is called the Minnesota Change Network. And it starts with the question of culture. Who are you? Who are your people? What is your legacy? And then we'll go on to things like power, change, and all of the other things that you get to learn. But if we do not invest in understanding who we are, we will struggle for a long time. So, with that happy note, I will go on and let you know that tonight I want to talk about three themes. Who is the Latinx community? What's the philanthropic response to this community? And how does Latinx philanthropy look? And how do we get more engagement? First, the word Latinx is kind of foreign to me. I grew up with the word Latina, Latino, Mexicana, Mexicano. And yet, this is the new word coming from our youth, and doggone it, we're going to adapt and figure it out. So here we are. You know that Latino, and we have male and female. So Latino is male, Latina is female, and I want to say Latinx is neutral. So our youth have been bringing up a word, Latinx, that calls for more inclusion and is gender neutral. And so that's something that I just wanted to share with you because I'm learning about it too. So let's talk about the U.S. Latino community. And I want to give you a profile of the community. One question I will give you the answer to is, what are the numbers? How does the community look right now? And I will tell you that there is significant growth going on in the Latinx community. Where do we come from? Many of the immigrants that have come into this country from Latin America were Mexican. That is changing. It is now looking more and more like Central America. And we will talk a little bit more about that. And then I want to just give you a few words on our culture, our very diverse Latinx culture. We are familia. We are comunidad. That is our culture. So what do the numbers say? Well, the growth from 1980 to 2015 has grown from just under 14 million to over 55 million in 2015. And I want to tell you, it is now 58 million in 2016, as far as I could reach back to your numbers. And it is growing, but it is also slowing a bit. The median age went up from 22 to 28 years, and compare that to the age of whites, which is at 43 years old from this Pew Research information that I have. The high school dropout rate has been a significant issue. I'm jumping down to the fourth bullet there. The high school dropout rate has been a significant issue. And I have to tell you, in Minnesota, Latinos have the lowest graduation rate in the nation compared to all other states. This is a problem. And I could talk a whole lot about K-12 education that is not built for our children of color. It is not built for our kids from where they come from, culturally, economically, spiritually, the whole bit. I will not, because we'll be here for a very long time. But I also want to tell you there's some bright news, and that we have an increase in college enrollment. And as a matter of fact, almost 40%, or about 40% of the Latinx community, of the youth, mostly youth, some adults, almost 40% have a college experience. So that's a bright light that I want to focus on. But in the same voice, I want to say that we are less likely to obtain a 4-year degree. We have to dig into that and figure out why is that. We leave without a degree. I'm sure we have a lot of student loans. So that is a problem. Again, income increase, and this isn't really an increase. I mean, this is probably just as flat as all other incomes were during this period of time between 1980 and 2015. But I have to say, probably in the last couple of years, I think employment has gone up and wages have gone up a bit. Poverty rate has decreased just a little bit, not very much, but it's a high poverty rate at 22%. And culturally, 90% of Latinx people live in a family household setting. And what that says to me, and what it might say to you, is that we still have cohesion in our families, that they're still connected. Now, in a minute, I'm going to talk about families separated at the border. But the way that we lose community is to have families taken apart by the government. Whether it's child protection, I'm going to take your kid away, and I'm going to terminate your parental rights. Or whether it's a Native kid that they took out of a home because they wanted him or her to be Christian. Now they are separating families at the border because that is the way to blow up our Latino community coming into this country. But two things you should remember. One is that we are, in 2015, we were 17.6, almost 18% of the US population, over 18% now. And by 2050, Latinos will comprise a quarter or even more of the total population. That's a large group. That is a very, very large group. So where do we come from? Over 63% of us have Mexican roots. Like my family. We came in the early 20s. We stayed. People had families. They built businesses. They sent their children to school. They did pretty well. The second largest group of Latinos in the US are Puerto Ricans, at about almost 6%. And we know how Puerto Rico is suffering right now. So I can't go into it because I don't have enough time, but I will tell you, I've been to Puerto Rico. I communicate with the Community Foundation Puerto Rico, and it is a real crisis there. And they do not have the right to vote. They're citizens, but they don't have the right to vote, and that is a problem. Over 34% of Latinos are foreign-born, although that number continues to go down, especially with the current policies. But there's only 34% of Latinos that are foreign-born, and they are coming now from the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and with some coming from the Dominican Republic and Colombia. And again, this is a change from what it used to be. So let's talk a little bit about culture. My behind? I'm behind. I'm going the other way. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about culture. Our culture is collective. Family is most important, or it has been most important. We are child-centered. We are community-focused. Again, we are a collective. So it's hard for many of us to go into the rugged individual culture and kind of compete on a day-to-day basis. We have to learn how to do it, no doubt about it. But it isn't the way that many of us grew up. And we don't like it very much. And therefore, we don't stay in organizations for a long time if we don't like it. We have language that connects us. It's Spanish. But I also have to tell you that my first language was English. My Spanish is fleeting. I go down to Mexico on a regular basis, especially in February from Minneapolis, where I can get out of the cold and practice my Spanish. And I was there when the polar vortex came in February. I had perfect timing on that. We also love authenticity, personalismo, self-respect, trust, and connection with others. Our spirituality. 55% of us are Catholic, and again, this is all from Pew. Although evangelicals have started to eat in on that number, we have an enormous work ethic, and I'll tell you, Latinos come into this country, immigrants, and they'll have 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. They'll have 4 jobs between moms and dads. And the question is, who takes care of the children? The family starts falling apart at that point. Education. In our culture, it's more than just books and school. It is about manners. It is about respect. It is much, much more than just learning from a book. And that's something that, that we need to remember. We also really believe in authority, which does not help us a lot of the time, especially if our kids are not doing well in school and we don't know how to confront the authorities at the school. But we are generous. We love to give time, talent, and resources, but we do it differently. So let me just talk a little bit about some information that I ran into that gives you a bright picture about the Latino community in the U.S. In the last decade, there was a group that called themselves the Latino Donor Collaborative, and they've just done a new study on the Latino GDP in the U.S. This study was done by David Hayes Bautista out of UCLA and Warren Shank, who runs an organization called Latino Futures Research. And here's what they found, and it's relatively new. They say that if the Latino GDP were a country, it would be the 7th largest in the world, only trailing the US, China, Japan, Germany, the UK, and France. And they also say in this particular document that the GDP produced by Latinos is $2.13 trillion. The growth of the GDP is projected to account for almost 25% of the US GDP growth by 2020, which is right around the corner. There is another futurist by the name of Marin Perez who notes that of the 28 million businesses in the US, 13%, or 3,640,000, are owned by Latinos, but very little capital, very little venture capital gets into those Latino businesses. Just think of what it would look like if it did. What about the workforce? Well, this is a stunning number. Latinos account for 70% of the US workforce increase in the first half of this decade. It'll be interesting to see how, when we ban all immigrants, which is the path that we're currently on, how our economic engine in this country will do. Because we know what immigrants and what people of color have done to help the dominant community, really accrue the wealth that they have. The other statistic here is growth. The US Latino GDP is growing 70% faster than the country's non-Latino GDP. And again, the Latino community is a huge part of the economy. We know that we need immigrants for the right reasons, but we also need them because of our economy. So with all of the Latino growth, how have US community foundations responded? Well, by investing slightly over 1% of their philanthropic resources in the Latinx community. 1.1% to be precise. And this was a study that was done by HIP, Hispanics in Philanthropy, and the Foundation Center. It's a little bit old, it's in 2011, but I have to say, I don't know that things have improved greatly. Again, the dollar amounts at the highest peak, which was 0607, probably about $225 million from organized philanthropy, these foundations, into the Latinx community. And here you see different kinds of foundations, and for example, independent foundations had 0.8%, not even 1%, of the $452,828,000 that they put out in grants. So this tends to be a problem. And the question is, why does the Latinx community receive such a small share of philanthropic dollars? Well, let's take a look at who comprises the leadership. Who sits in the CEO chairs and who sits in the board chairs? Latinx CEOs have stabilized between 1.5 and 3%. And you see that in 2012, that was probably at the higher level, and it started going down after that. There aren't very many of us in the foundation chairs at the top. And we need to think about that in terms of how is our economy growing, how is the Latino community contributing to the economy and to the all of the social assets of the United States. And why is it that this particular issue of hiring is so hard? We can also take a look at board and senior staff roles. And we can see here that the Hispanic Latino board presence is right around 4%. It was 3%. It's about 4%. It probably isn't, could be higher than that. It's probably not much higher than that. And here's what I want to say about it. We all know that more diversity on every single one of the boards, whether it's private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector, makes for better decisions. We need to make sure that we have African Americans, Native Americans, Asians, Latinos, and every other voice contributing to the work of foundations as they think about community problems. And I just want to say that, before I go on to the next, that as I came into my role as the CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, the first thing I put on the board table was the question of immigration. Now, I didn't do it in exactly the right way, because they brought in advocates, and they advocated for different laws. They advocated for more money for immigrants, which was fine. But the smart thing for me to do, which I did at the second meeting, was to bring in the business community with the Immigrant Law Center. And that combo was absolutely stellar. My board loved it because they could talk both about what our moral responsibility is, but they could also talk about the economic opportunity. And that is what we needed to do. And as the CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, I also have to tell you that we led the charge of putting together millions of dollars for DACA kids, so that we could stabilize DACA kids, that we would have them have the resources necessary to fill out the forms and pay the fees. And we had thousands of DACA kids that got stabilized. Now, we're all nervous about that, as we know. But that is why you want both board and CEOs that are people of color. In this case that I'm arguing, we're talking about Latinos. But I could argue the same thing for African Americans, for Native Americans, and for Asians. It will make your organization better. So Latinx Foundation program officers have done a little better. They're probably up close to 10% at this study. But I don't know of many, and this is from my experience, that make it to the corner office. So, unless they change organizations. So we have to think about what needs to happen so that we can upgrade their skills and abilities so that they hit that corner office really, really high. Now that I've given you a bit about the numbers, the culture, I want to ask, how does Latinx philanthropy look? Well, the statement that I can tell you with all honesty is it begins at home. And it begins, the story here is about remittances. And I'll show you the numbers in a minute. It will blow your mind. But we give to family and friends, no matter how much we have or how much we don't have. Oh my gosh. All right? We donate to organizations we trust, like religious organizations, scholarships, local causes, but we need to know you. So for a community foundation to come and say, ¿Cómo estás? Would you like to open a donor advised fund? You only need $10,000 at the Minneapolis Foundation. It's like, what? What are you talking about? Totally foreign. The most noticeable attribute of Latinx philanthropy is that much of it is informal. They give to people they know, to organizations that they know. They give to their family and they give to their children. When we ask about giving, and we've all heard the rhetoric around Latinos, about being takers, about not being contributors, I have to say that Latinos have always been generous. And they take care of their families and communities. So here we have, and you all know what remittances are, so I don't need to say that, but according to the World Bank and Pew Research Center, migrant remittances to all Latin American and Caribbean countries were nearly $75 billion in 2017, an increase of 7.4%, mostly coming from the Latin American migrants in the US. That is huge, huge generosity. And worldwide, Mexico ranks 4th in remittances sent by migrants. This information is out of Pew, again, Hispanic Trends. So what else do we do? Well, we have a group called HIP. It's a nonprofit organization. It's transnational. It works on Latino leadership. It works on equity. It works on voice. And as a matter of fact, the CEO of this organization just spoke out about the question of citizenship on the census and asked, please not to demonize the census for communities of color. And Latinos can be any color. You know that. We can be black, we can be white, we can be Asian, we can be red. We are all colors. So we go across all races. I have to say that I was on the HIP board. I'm off just recently now. But I was there, I want to say 8 or 9 years. And I loved every minute of it. It's transnational. It has an office in Mexico. It's all over Latin America. And it is bringing hope to those communities. But the one thing I just want to leave you with is HIP is so beautiful. It took donors down to the border to look at what's happening at the border. It has an online presence where if you want to give to Latin America, you can give through HIP Give. But they also talk about the beautiful image of the collective corazón. It is our collective heart that is most notable in the work that they're doing. We also have giving circles, and I can go through a number of the giving circles, but I want to say that in Boston, they have a Latino Legacy Fund, and when Puerto Rico had the Hurricane Maria, they sent that Latino giving circle sent a huge amount of money to Puerto Rico. So these giving circles are really ramping up. They're getting Latino donors to give their own money so that we can make sure that our causes are taken care of. But I have a mixed feeling about it, and that is this. I don't want us to live at the edge of philanthropy. You know, the Minneapolis Foundation now probably has $800 or $900 million. I don't want just a giving circle for the Latino community or for communities of color. I want them to be in the center of the picture. So how we move them, how we integrate them straight on into the best position at the center in order to achieve equity is the dream that I have. Here's another kind of philanthropy, and I have to say, Sister Norma on the left side, I just saw her, I met her at a National Community Foundations conference. The Pope calls her his favorite nun, and she is the person who's called in McAllen. She runs the Catholic Charities of Rio Grande Valley. She got called when the whole issue at the border started happening, and was told that there are 200 people standing at the bus stop, or at the bus station. What can she do? She called a local priest. She asked him to open up the church. They took those 200 people and they started giving them food, giving them shelter, and doing the best they could. She is now receiving about 800 people a day at the border. She also talks about how she has had to sit with kids who have been separated from their families. This is Latinx philanthropy. We also have more famous people. Lin-Manuel just had a wonderful event in Puerto Rico and had Hamilton $10 for students, but the rest of us had to pay $5,000 or something like that. And because he wants to build the arts, right? And well, he should. If we can afford it, we should be down there, and we should be putting as much money as we can into that organization. But Alan, Carmen, Castellano, I have to say, they are such humble people. I have met them they are so wonderful. They won the lottery. And I remember the story they told. Alan, he looked at the ticket and he couldn't believe the numbers. He compared the numbers. Then he went and took a walk behind his house. Then he came back and looked again and looked again. Finally, he woke up his wife, Carmen, and said, I think we won the lottery. And they started a family foundation. And they give to Latino causes and Latino nonprofits. And finally, let me just tell you a little bit about a project that I'm working on that I'm very excited about. It's called Building Broader Communities in the Americas. And it takes the element of community foundations in the US and hopefully puts them together with community foundations in Mexico, in Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, and tries to track where migrants are coming from so that we can get those foundations, community foundations together to solve problems together. And here is what they think. BBCA organizers believe that enhancing our understanding of transnational communities in the hemisphere, and this is really about not only the US and Mexico and Central and South America and the Caribbean, but Canada is there too. We need to strengthen our relationships across the Americas. We need to change the conversation about migration and immigrants in the Americas. We need to make sure that civil society in all of these countries is as strong as it can be, so we don't have the kind of rhetoric that we've got going on now, or we can change that kind of rhetoric. And one of the interesting things that this project is doing, and I'll tell you just in terms of Minneapolis, it is tracking right at this moment all of the men that came from the state of Morelos to Minneapolis and trying to figure out who are they, what's their profile, what are their assets, what are their needs. And Comunidad, the community foundation in Morelos, is coming up in Minneapolis in June, so we can put them together with the Mexican Council, with the foundations together, and also the community together, so we can figure out what the needs are. One side note about the immigration from Mexico or any other place to the United States. I have not seen this, but I'm told by the Comunidad, the Mexican Community Foundation exec, that there are many women who are raising families without husbands because they have come up and found work. They've sent money and they've got decent housing and they have enough to eat, but their family has been split up and they've lived apart for a very long time. So we're going to dig into that and figure out what is the answer to this. This project is part of trying to figure out how to solve that problem. So let me say just a couple more things. One question I keep asking or hearing is, how do we encourage more philanthropy in the Latino community? How do we encourage philanthropy to invite more Latinos into philanthropy? And it's like, it's all about relationships. We know that philanthropy is all about relationships. And so what I would say is that we have to get out of our comfort zone, expand our network, bring people in that we may feel are not exactly like us, or maybe are exactly like us. We already have those people in our networks. But let's make sure that we're inviting Latinos, all people of color, into foundation boards, into foundation leadership, staff leadership, and into all of the other activities that philanthropy gets its hands on. Let me close by saying, this was a comment that I read while I was doing a little bit of this research, and it's Dionisia Nava, who's a student at California State University, Los Angeles. And she said this: get behind other people's success. Your life was built on other people's dreams. My life, Sandy Vargas, was built on my grandmother's dream and the women in my family. So let's not let them down. And I invite all of you to get behind other people's success. Have them not only as their dream, but as your dream as they move forward. Gracias.
So Sandy, we don't have a microphone, so hopefully the room will carry. So whoever would like to ask a question, just let Sandy know, and we have plenty of time for questions from the audience. But Sandy, you'll want to head back to the microphone.
All right. I actually have a loud voice. So.
Unless you'd like to project. That's
okay,
well.
all right. Questions, yes?
I always have a question. Tiara Dungy, student at the Lilly School. So you talked a little bit about people of color, Latinx people going into white spaces.
Yes.
And there's sometimes the idea that kind of gets around that philanthropy is apolitical. Doing something good for someone, like giving money or giving assistance, has nothing to do with politics, or some philanthropists are a little bit scared of supporting something political because, once again, good acts aren't political. But as a person of color going into other people's spaces, where you're not the median voter, where things aren't geared towards you, where they're not our spaces, how do you kind of bridge the gap in communication when the person of color's presence is a political statement in and of itself? Every movement is political, every opinion or every hesitance to go along with something is essentially a small protest movement. How do you deal with that tension in philanthropy?
I think what you bring up is very hard. It is very hard because one of the things that I've talked to Lori about is the whole question of power and who holds the power, right? And when we think about power, we think about two ways. There's a book called Understanding New Power, also a Harvard Business Review article if you're wanting to look at it. But old power is, it's closed. It goes like this. I don't want you to have it. I have it. I don't want you to see it. You probably can't get in because I'm not going to let you in. And what these guys say in this article and in this book is that we have to figure out what is the power that reacts to that, and that is new power from the ground up. Now, in every organization, you're not going to be able to get 50 of your friends to go ride on the organization, right? But I think one of the things that needs to happen is that you have to make sure that you know who you are, what you stand for, just as I said, the cultural piece of it. And you have to be willing to take on some of those issues. There's different ways of taking it on, though. You can take it head on, you can be in their face, or you can take it on over time while you cultivate relationships and point out why you think differently in a way that's respectful. And I think that second part is really what I've had a lot of success with. Not to say that I haven't spoken out. And the closer I got to my retirement, the more I spoke out. I mean, you were talking about a risk profile earlier on foundations. And it's like, I went into the Minneapolis Foundation as the CEO and president, and I had been part of Hennepin County, which I reported to. Hennepin County didn't get mentioned, but I just want to tell you, it's a $2 billion county. I reported as the executive position to the 7 electeds, and it's straight up hard politics. And so you're always thinking about who's going with who's going. Don't get mad at one, even if they look like they're mad at each other. Believe me, they are not mad at each other. They need those votes. They're going to get together. When I went into the foundation, it was like so hard to discern. Because it's like, I have this 30-person board, and I didn't know them very well. I spent a lot of time getting to know board members and trying to figure out what is my relationship with you. Because, but I also have to say, I followed Emmett Carson, and so they had gotten, some education from Emmett, and I got to go in behind him. But I want to say that, it is built on relationships. And you have to decide whether it's worth it to you. We don't want people to leave in the work that we're doing at the Humphrey School. I will tell you, we have conversations with leaders that we're trying to support. 21 is the cohort right now. And almost to a person, they talk about being brutalized by the organizations they work for. So, and 20 of them are people of color. So we help them work through that to try and figure out, where they want to go. Because they're going to run into it again. So getting back to their culture, getting back to their strength, getting back to their people, really gives them the strength. And I have to tell you, many of them have done really, really well. And they're also not taking everything personally, which is the other thing. It's like, you gotta let it ride unless you think it's really worth the fight. Yes?
You mentioned the very low representation on foundation board with the Latinx community, and you also mentioned the 1%
Grants?
grants going to Latinx organizations. Is part of that also a cultural thing that the Latinx community is not approaching these foundations, or they're not comfortable doing it, or?
I think it's a couple of things. Let me tell you what I think it is. I think number one is visibility to the people who are on those boards. Boards are kind of self-fulfilling a lot of the time. I mean, they're pulling from their networks, and their networks are pretty much like themselves. And so one of the questions that we need to ask is, how do people of color make sure that they get in that network of those foundation boards. What events do they go to? Who do they know? When I wanted the job of county administrator at Hennepin, or deputy county administrator, I had just come out of Harvard, and I figured out, I tried to figure out in my network who knew the county administrator that was acting. And it happened to be a city council person, and I knew her well because I had worked for the city of Minneapolis. So I went to her and I said, will you take my resume in? And she did. And she said, he'll call you. He didn't. I called him. And it took them about 6 months to hire me. So here's the point. The point is you gotta have visibility. You have to figure out where you wanna go. And you gotta figure out who do you have to know or who do you have to network in order to get there. But the other thing I want to say about foundation boards is that you have to have diversity. You have to have a differing of opinion. Because otherwise, if you have people around you, you all know this, if you have people around you that think exactly the same way, it's not going to go well long term. You're not going to generate new ideas, new insights, new ways of giving. And you have to have people who don't see things the way you see them. And that is hard. I had donors when I was at the Minneapolis Foundation that were, you can probably tell I'm more on the progressive side. I don't think I need to tell you that. But I had donors that were very conservative. And I would sit with them. And I remember sitting, we had a really great idea of putting together a donor-advised committee. So we could hear from donors. We could run ideas by donors. We could let them in on how we were thinking, and it really, really worked well. One looked at me and he said, do you give to, it was a nonprofit that was the Salvation Army. And I said, and the Salvation Army had just helped us because when the bridge over 35W, remember that bridge falling down? Salvation Army was there helping us with a bunch of stuff. And I said, yes, we give to the Salvation Army. So I got to know that donor, and he felt very comfortable with me, even though we didn't see the world the same way. So my advice on is for the board members to get out to the Latinx, to the African American, Native American, Asian communities. And we'll be happy, there's people in this room that will be happy to tell you how to do that. And it's also up to us to make sure our visibility in front of those groups is high enough for them to see us. Yeah.
Many community foundation investments in their endowments are relatively opaque without a very clearly identified investment policy statement for the outside community. What moves have you seen in the community foundation space to bring the endowments of those foundations in line with an inclusive collective good strategy, examples being avoiding investments in private prisons that are publicly traded or tobacco that are both known to disproportionately impact communities of color, immigrant populations, and other marginalized communities?
I think more and more foundations are starting to tune into that, but it will depend on what board members say in their investment committees in particular. Because I know that the investment committees, for the most part, they'll be saying, no, we're going to trump those good things to do with what's performing the best, right? So what we need to do is figure out, okay, where do we find some ground to start moving in the direction we want to? But it's going to take some different board members and different ways of thinking financially than the regular committee investment members that we have usually on our boards. I earlier spoke about a couple of things. One is that we were building the Vikings Stadium and US Bank Stadium for the Vikings, and we wanted to make sure that there was a high minority and women-owned business participation. So we put together a fund of $1 million to make sure that they had working capital, because that's the hardest to get. We put half of it on the table from our own funds at the Minneapolis Foundation, and then we went to donors, and they subscribed immediately. because they were gonna get it paid back into their donor advised funds with a little bit of 2% over a 5-year period. Plus, we made sure we had enough money if there were any defaults. So it's like, you know, thinking about creatively, how do you get out there in the community and figure out how do you use your money creatively. It got cycled into the minority business community and the women-owned business community, and they hit some very high goals, which was really great. But we need to think about that more and more. Another thing we did is we had a bank, a community bank, come to us and say, we need $1 million, will you underwrite it, we'll guarantee it, we want to build some housing for low-income people. We said yes. And we used part of our capital to do that. We've got to be more creative with capital utilization, especially on things that are just desperate that our communities need. But we've got to have different thinkers in the chairs that are making those decisions. Yes?
Betty Morales with the Latino School of Latino Affairs. So my question to you is, how do we tap into younger generations? So in your slide, you did show that leadership, representation and leadership is so low. I can tell you that my mom probably does not know what I do. And I feel like I can explain to her a number of times. I've explained to her my undergraduate degree, some of us in our family have masters, but I feel like it's such a learning curve for me families to understand. Kind of the philanthropic world, the non-profit world, it's not something that comes natural to us. So how do we get more Latinos, Latinas, Latinx into this field at a younger age? IEP, there's back to faculty, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have 6% Hispanic. And how do we make sure that we're connecting them to the industry that could really help us do our jobs better, right? So how do we not know that we have the Kelly School, which is also a huge competition, who want to become entrepreneurs, be their own bosses. How do we encourage that younger generation to look into the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic field, and something on their own foundation?
Absolutely. We want them to make as much money as possible and to build their own foundation. Doggone it. Money is not bad, it is very good, so we just need to have a lot more of it. I think we have to start earlier than we have, and we have to expose our young people to it. I know that I chair a group called Casa de Esperanza, and it works against domestic violence, it's national. And one of the things that we do is we specifically have a philosophy of not only women against domestic violence, we have men and we have children. And so we have young people in with us as we're doing the work. Whether it's work on policy, whether it's work at the shelter, whether it's, you know, work in trying to take women in who are coming from Central America. But we have got to figure out, I think we have a lot of false barriers that exist around, you know, I don't know about your family, but when I was younger, and I remember this so well, the kids used to go to the parties with the parents, right? I mean, the baile. I mean, so that all of the kids were there. They'd go to sleep on a chair or couch or something. And it's like, we need to go back to that idea, only with our kids, and maybe a little bit older, but bring our youth into the issues and the problems. And I think we need to invite them, because I think oftentimes they don't feel invited. So that's, did I answer all your question, or what was your other question? All right, we'll talk later. Yes?
Hi, I'm Dana Guan, I'm at the Latino School of Philanthropy as a student. And you shared some data that I think helps to build power for the community. And being that you're here with the Mays Institute, did you share any recommendations for what kind of research you'd like to see with the Latino community, or, you know, to kind of show off some of this informal giving that they do, or what, you know, if you shared it, can you share with us your ideas?
I have a good relationship with Lori Parlberg over there, and so I haven't yet, but I will. You and I have talked, and so, you know, I think these structures have to radically change. And it's hard to hear, but these top-down deals like this are not going to last forever. And so one of the questions that I have in my mind is, how do we redesign philanthropy so it is inclusive? Because it's pretty exclusive right now. You have to be connected to certain groups, you have to be invited in. You know, my friends used to tell me, you're gonna become the CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, but just remember this, remember who your friends were before you went into that position. Because there are a whole lot of people that are going after you because they need the money, and I understand that. I think we really, I don't like this, you know, here's the power, here are the supplicants. We gotta figure this out. And I'm not sure exactly how we do it. I think giving circles, but I think diversifying and figuring out the question of equity is really, really important. And I want to say that when I went into the Minneapolis Foundation, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on education. I did that, economic development and civic engagement, and we did a lot of that. By the time I left, we were asking the community, what would you like to see? What is it that you want? So the number one thing, I think, is we need to listen and not tell people what we think the answer to their problems are. Those communities know the answers. We just need to stand with them and help them gather the resources so that they can get that work done. Yes?
So on the development side, is there a certain, way that we should approach if we're talking to donors from the Latinx community? Is there an appropriate way culturally that we should address the aspect of bringing them in as part of our family in our school or unit, or ways that we should approach it in a specific way to make them more culturally accepted as part of our donor community?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we need to do is figure out how to spend time with those particular donors and figure out what they like to do and what their giving looks like. And they need to know you. They need to know me. And for example, and I don't think I said it before, but yeah, maybe I did. I had asked a Latino donor for it would cost $10,000 to open up a donor advice fund, yeah. And he just didn't respond to it. It was just foreign to him. But then he gave $50,000 to a scholarship fund for Latino kids. He knew those people. So we need to figure out how to change those relationships and figure out what do they feel comfortable with. And they will come into organized philanthropy. But we did a study at the Minneapolis Foundation, and you know how long it takes to get a really big donor into the foundation? It took about 7 years. On the other hand, there was an IPO that was just going out, and one of our board members offered an introduction, and at the first lunch, we got a $4 million gap opened. And then invited in to create philanthropy in his organization, in his business. So, but he was very used to, we didn't know he knew about philanthropy. We didn't know if he cared about it. But I think for donors of color, and especially those that are living at the community level, this Latinx, I have to tell you that this particular individual that I'm talking about has been really successful in the restaurant business and has all sorts of other kinds of activities going. Was undocumented. He will be documented. He will have his citizenship. Yes?
So as someone who's trying to create a board that looks more reflective of our community, what are ways that we as a predominantly white institution can make being members of our boards more comfortable for people who aren't comfortable in the situation?
Well, I think you have to, yeah, you have to ask more than one person.
Sure.
You have to have a handful of people. You have to give them, you have to ask them their opinion on what it is you're doing. And really promise that you're going to listen very closely, even if they disagree with you. And it can't be like the end of the world when that happens, because otherwise they'll go away and they won't come back. But I think that's the way to start. Again, it's just like anything else. You gotta start those relationships and you gotta deepen them over time. Yes?
I'm intrigued by that whole issue of trust building, especially in minority communities that have experienced over lifetimes oppression by the very group that they're trying to join with. Any thoughts or further?
You know, I think that is
considerations on
so,
trust?
I mean, for the Latino community, or any community, but communities of color in particular, because they have often been led down the wrong path. I think that's something that we just have to get used to, the fact that people aren't going to trust us right away. No matter how trustworthy we look, no matter what we say, even if I look like they do, it's like they've got to test that a little bit. So here's the thing, we need to put time into communicating with them. We need to invite them in, and we need to go out to their organizations and sit with them in their kind of environment. And I think over time, you can build trust. But it's a longer process than the American way of life is usually ready to invest. Yes? Yes, it is.
I've been listening to your presentation, and I've been to others when the speakers or presenters were talking about African Americans and philanthropy. It sounded so similar. And some of the same issues you indicated are issues that we deal with. There is, you mentioned power, there's unity in numbers. Are there any studies or any partnerships between the people of color that we're dealing with similar issues, but if there's more of us saying the same thing, using different strategies, it seems like we could accomplish more, but do you know of any?
I do, as a matter of fact. HIP and AbbVie have linked arms a whole lot. So I want to say that is a coming together that is really, really welcome. And what we need to do is reach out to brothers and sisters, all of us, and figure out, you know, how do we link arms, no matter who you are. If we can agree and decide on a direction, and we can do it together, I think we'll be so far ahead. You know, what happens in philanthropy is kind of it's like the crumbs, right? I mean, it's like whoever gets the grant, other people are mad, they're in competition, and it's like, how do we change that conversation? How do we work together? And how do we help each other be better at whatever it is? And how do we help philanthropy? How do we go in and talk to philanthropy about how they need to be better? Now, there is a heart-stopping idea, because you start thinking about, oh my God, I will never get another grant as long as I live. But there are some of us that are willing to do it that are not going to depend on grants, or even if we do depend on grants, we're not going to let that stop us from giving the feedback. I think we have to be honest with people. We have to be respectful, but we have to be honest. Yes?
You mentioned culture and how generations are shifting, and you gave the example of your first language being English. Are you seeing any shift with these generations that have been here for a while? I know for myself, my parents did not raise me bilingual because they wanted me to be American.
Yes.
So how do you see this shifting with the future generations who have this dual sense of culture, who identify as Latinas, but then also have raised and they were American?
My heart is broken. And the reason it is because I have a sister that's very close to, I'm close to her, she's close to me, who married somebody from northern Minnesota who was a Norwegian. And she has a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead. And I have two nieces who decided to go to an art school about a mile from where I live. And they both showed up. One told me, the other one didn't. One is blonde and blue-eyed, the other one is brown from South Texas. And they said they're cousins. And everybody said, no, you're not. And it's like, yes, we are. And my niece that lives in South Texas is she's totally immersed in culture, because that's where Texas is, in South Texas, with all of her mother, her father. My niece she's in Chicago right now. She isn't, and it is a big question for me to figure out, how do I raise the question with my family that hasn't been brought up the way that I have. So I want to say that yes, it'll be interesting to see the growth of the Latinx community and what intermarriage does to the culture of Latinos, and whether they will cultivate those roots. I think it's critically important that we think about that, and that we write about it, and that we talk to our families about it. But you're still Latina. All right. All right. Yep. All right.
Yes. I'm actually glad you guys brought this up because I'm part of a mixed family. We have Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Cuban in our family. So, and we have 2 children. One looks Hispanic, one does not look Hispanic. And the one that does is very strongly tied to her Hispanic culture and the language. What frustrates me as somebody who's not automatically associated with that is that in our family, I feel like we've tried to become a Hispanic family. I don't really see myself as just this outside of that, but nobody will see me that way. And I think to some degree there's still some potential in reaching out to people who are part of mixed families and understand some of that mixed culture and the potential and the history, the accurate history of Latin America and interaction with the United States, and really leverage those connections to be able to start some of the change we want to see. Because if we're not ready so far here, and we're trying to move the bar, and we have many different shades of color in our family, like how do we move the bar? And see the entire family as one cultural unit rather than...
I think culture is way beyond color. So, I mean, it's like, it's what are the practices, how do you understand the history, and how does everybody in the family, get that knowledge and create that knowledge? That's kind of one question. So way beyond the color of our skin. But the second thing is what other family members that are closer to the culture can you guys really get close to and hang out with, so that there's a lot of learning.
Well, my point is the other side. For purposely trying to incorporate more of it.
Yeah.
I'm saying from the people who are quote white or American or whatever they want to. How do we leverage the people that are supposedly white, but part of these mixed families, and we start to bring the conversation closer? Because they already have a starting at least.
Yeah, right, and they already have kids that are, part of that other culture, right? Do I hear you right? Yeah.
Yes, but
I
it's
think,
not just the kids.
Yeah, no, it's not just the kids. I think just have to have a conversation about it, an open conversation about it. I don't have a really fast answer on that one. I'll have to think about it. Yes?
Hi. So I am just kind of going back to your comment on how we can get more Latino leadership in the works. I know that putting ourselves out there and going to their safe space and zone. I think that's what I am trying to do as well. I work at a nonprofit, Plaza. But another thing I wanted to encourage the students at the IU School of Philanthropy is to put your guys, so much is asked of us, putting ourselves in uncomfortable positions, but I would encourage the students who are part of the majority white students to also reach out to us, put yourselves in maybe, go to a Latino or other minority events. I think that would also kind of allow you to experience some of that uncomfortableness and create some type of understanding of how that feels like, and that's how we can also build partnerships.
Great idea. Great idea.
Maybe time for one more question?
Yes.
I just have a quick question. Do you feel social media today and like just what you see come from the media, do you feel like it has an effect on like the Latinx community and people of color in general? Do you feel like it's having more of a positive impact to drive like those conversations and to get that change within the community?
If you knew my age, you'd say, oh, what a lie, and you'd be right. So I'm not an expert on that. I will tell you that I have a niece that works with me on some of this stuff, and I can never call her because she will never answer the phone. I can text her and then she'll respond.
Okay.
I don't have a good answer for you. I think communities of color are finding their voice. I think youth is finding their voice, and I think that social media is a good part of that. And it's connecting them. And they have very little fear so far. And so that's what we need to cultivate. And that is the new power that needs to be completely cultivated so that they're willing to stand up and speak out on issues that are important. All right.
Thank you everyone who agree with me that it's been an exciting evening, it's been a stimulating discussion, and this is just the beginning. What we learned today, you can all leave here empowered. You know what Latinx stands for now, if you didn't know it already. You know that the Latinx community is going to be a quarter of the US population, and philanthropy needs to pay attention. So I just want to thank Sandy again for being here today, but thank all of you for carving out time, and I hope that this is just the beginning, that we'll all take an assignment from this conversation tonight to play our part in making philanthropy and our communities more inclusive, more diverse, and encouraging everyone to be part of this conversation as well. So spread the word on social media, those of you who are on Instagram and Twitter, tell that story, and let's just keep this conversation going. Thank you very much. Special thanks to Amy Conley, who's been helping. We have a big round of applause. Who's been working on the Mason Institute team. Members who might have left, but do, if you have a moment, talk to Laurie Perlberg. She is our Mott Foundation Community Chair in Community Philanthropy. And so all the tough questions that haven't been answered, she can take them on in her next research project. Okay, thank you all.